The Chargers had their rookie minicamp over the weekend, and we have a ton of notes from it, but Jim Harbaugh and company did things a little bit differently because they are committed to finding that next undrafted diamond in the rough.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, the Chargers have a very rich history of finding undrafted free agents that can contribute. Obviously, they have one of them that's going to be putting on a gold jacket here very shortly. And so the Chargers actually have already found a couple of UDFAs that they really like and that they're kind of protecting a little bit going into this offseason. And Coach Harbaugh also told us that Zion Johnson, whether it's at center or at guard, will be starting for this football team this season.
Yeah, and we also know now that even though the schedule hasn't fully come out, that the Chargers will be playing the Kansas City Chiefs week 1 in Brazil. So that we have to get into. But this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. David, getting any sort of camp, any rookie camp, any sort of action that happens on a football field this time of year is always going to get me going for sure, because
football,
we have
baby.
Actual football content, things are happening. And I think once you see that rookie draft class all getting out there on the field and start working out, and you get to see Omarion Hampton's calves and you're just like, oh my God, look at him, he just looks like the perfect running back. It starts to feel closer to actual football in the 2025 season. And we got to see and hear a lot about what happened at that rookie minicamp over the weekend, but there was a very clear focus according to Jim Harbaugh, who had a press conference about what this period, what this weekend was all about. Because I think there's a lot of people that wonder, hey, what are you getting out of this, right? You have a bunch of guys out there who are running around in shorts and t-shirts. How do you kind of make the most? How do you actually differentiate these guys? And Jim Harbaugh made it very clear that, hey, this part is about these undrafted free agents, these guys that we haven't really got to see in person a lot yet, and whittling it down, the roster that is, to make sure that we have the best 90 guys to potentially find, hey, one of these guys could be that next diamond in the rough.
Hey, this is the first chance, right? This is the first opportunity to see these guys on the football field, and Jim Harbaugh said it very clearly. He said this is a day and a weekend of evaluation. Really just mining for gold, diamonds and gems. Those rare gems, they don't just hop out of the ground and into your pocket. You got to dig. You got to go in there and find them. So that's what I want to do. That's top of the list. And so, yeah, this right here is this first opportunity for him to kind of get his draft class on the football field, get all of those undrafted free agents, get, your football team together for the very first time to be able to start that journey of figuring out who is going to be that next 53 members and those practice squad participants for the Chargers this season.
And the Chargers truly do believe in the practice squad as kind of just an extension of the roster, and the fact that they pretty much feel like they have kind of a 70-man roster, and they really value who are taking those spots. And I think for a lot of the undrafted guys you're talking about, that is really kind of what the goal is, right? You want to make the team, of course. It's very hard to crack a 53-man roster, especially one that's as deep as the Chargers, because you can talk about the top-end talent and maybe some of the flaws that they have. This is one of the deeper Chargers teams, maybe the deepest Chargers team I could remember at a ton of positions. So it's going to be hard for these undrafted free agents to make the roster. But we know how many practice squad players are called upon during the season, and those spots are really important.
Yeah.
And the one big kind of difference that we've seen so far in this rookie camp, according to Daniel Popper and the people that were out there, was that they're not really worried about evaluating the rookies they've drafted. They did their homework on those guys. They don't really need to see a ton more. And they didn't do any 11-on-11s as well, which is interesting during this rookie minicamp. And basically the thought process was, according to Jim Harbaugh, let's identify the talent. Let's get the best 90 then we'll move forward from there, because the Chargers are going to have to continue to trim this roster down. And basically what he's saying is, we know the draft picks. We've already done our homework. This is about finding more about these other guys. And the best way for us to do that is, don't worry about the scheme and the terminology and all of that stuff as much. We're going to do drills. We're going to do very specific things to try to see how much talent is in there. And then we'll take those talented players and as many talented players as we can. And then we'll start to dive a little deeper into how they play as a team and more of the team drills.
Yeah, it's very interesting how they kind of changed their entire philosophy on how they're evaluating these guys this year, as opposed to, how they did it in the first season. So, according to, the notes here I got from Daniel Popper of The Athletic, obviously one of the best Chargers beat writers out there. He's been truly fantastic, obviously covering the Chargers for, several seasons now. But, hey, one of those sections was in individual drills, where they had players kind of doing their position stuff. Then they had drills with Ryan Ficken doing a couple of special teams drills, trying to get that dialed in. Obviously, we know probably a couple of those draft picks at the back end of the draft were probably specifically because of Ryan Ficken. The RJ Mickens and the Triquez Bridges, probably guys that are going to be ticketed for that special teams unit. And then, of course, getting a couple of those, drills in there with Ben Herbert, trying to make sure that physical fitness level is where it needs to be. And then, of course, doing a couple of plays in installs, getting that early jump on that. Kind of different, 3 or 4 different stations that they had guys circling through, trying to see where they're at on the kind of first couple days they're at the beautiful practice facility, the Bowl.
What it seemed like to me, too, was just less thinking and more just kind of being out there, being an athlete and kind of showing those things. One of the things Daniel Popper brought up was just them running 3 cone drills, which is obviously most famous from the combine.
For the
and
draft,
one of the metrics. One of the biggest things at the combine that is used to measure kind of agility and lateral quickness and those kind of things. And that is what they were trying to figure out, which is interesting that that's the way they're going. But they just want to see who has the talent and also who kind of looks different, who moves different than the rest of these guys out there. You can't really see that until you're seeing it in person amongst kind of other guys that are vying for an NFL roster. But I do think it was great to see a great turnout. I think Daniel Popper said 56 players were there, not just the undrafted free agents.
I like that.
Not just the rookies, but you also had the international pathway players. You had guys trying out, like one of the guys, Jimmy Bell Jr., we talked about, who's a former basketball player, and really just the other guys that stayed around from last year's practice squad. Tremont Morris Brash, a guy we were high on last year, that went and really had a good...
Gilman's little brother actually tried out as well, which is an interesting
it'll
one.
be really interesting to see what happens with that. That seems like a cool deal, especially for Alohi, for his little brother to get a tryout. But one of the other cool things that we got over the weekend was hearing from their 3rd and 4th round picks, Jamari Caldwell and Kyle Kennard. And one of the things that both of them were floored by was the presence of Khalil Mack. And then both guys were asked about it because they ran into him in the locker room when they were at the facility. And very cool of Khalil Mack to be at the facility to hang out with those young guys, because it's not something that he has to do. It's not required.
Not at all.
And he's out there, doing what he had to do. But it was clear hearing from them, David, that this is the reason you get someone like a Khalil Mack. Leadership is so hard to quantify, but every coach raves about it all the time. When you hear kind of the way these guys think and talk about Khalil Mack, you're like, that's the added benefit of having a veteran like that, a future Hall of Famer like that in your locker room.
Well, it just goes to show you, it's another example of Khalil's greatness off the field, of him doing the team bonding, taking the defensive players out to dinners and paying for everything every single time. And then eventually that leading to the offensive players going out and doing that same thing, just kind of being a trailblazer, being that type of guy that said, hey, I'm going to show you my greatness on the field, and I'm going to show you my greatness off the field by connecting with these young players, these next guys that are going to be a part of this defense, that are going to try to replicate the success, or even better, improve upon and expand upon that success, taking that from beating the teams you're supposed to be beating to going up there against the top teams in the NFL and shutting those teams down as well.
Yeah, and I think it just shows the effect it has specifically on younger players. I think it summed up well when Kyle Kennard said, he made a joke to me, don't celebrate too long. It's time to get to work, because he just got drafted, obviously. And he said, I'm like, definitely, if Khalil Mack is telling me don't celebrate, I'll stay in the house and go to sleep. And I just think that having a guy like that to follow, do what Khalil Mack does, act like Khalil Mack, and you'll have a chance. I mean, Jamar Caldwell also saying, I played with him on Madden, because he's just been around so long, he just means something different to these younger guys. But even over at Minicamp, David, we got to hear about a couple of guys that have a leg up on potential roster spots. The stock is rising for 3 undrafted free agents that Jim Harbaugh brought up specifically. So we're getting into all those and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building your wealth. And one of the things I love about Monarch Money is just the easy collaboration. I use it with my wife, and managing money with your partner is smoother than ever, and you can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. It's very much helped also since having a baby, because you're buying all these things you need for a baby and you've never had a baby before, and you can really help keep track of it and realize, hey, these are the things I have to kind of fix into my budget now, and I love that part of Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. David, there is only so much you can glean from a rookie minicamp when guys are running around in shorts and t-shirts, but don't tell Jim Harbaugh that, because, I mean, it might have well been the first game of the season, the amount of energy that dude seemed to be bringing to that rookie minicamp, and just how excited that dude is to be around football again. And it was very interesting because we got to learn how he felt about a couple of guys, because when talking about the undrafted free agents, he basically said with all these draft picks, hey, we know these guys, we've done our homework on these guys. And a lot of these guys, because you can't get to everyone, you're learning a lot about on that first weekend. But he did bring up 3 guys specifically that he said that the Chargers knew and had done their homework on and had already put great tape together that they are evaluating and know of going into it, which means obviously that they have kind of a leg up as far as the evaluation process goes, because the Chargers feel like they already know some things about him. And it was Rocket Sanders, the guy we brought up, Stevo Klotz, the fullback, tight end, hybrid type of player who we also brought up because he was a pancake machine, and we're like, this is definitely a Jim Harbaugh guy. And then another kind of interesting one was Luke Grimm, who was a wide receiver, and another guy we also talked about, while not talking about all the UDFAs, we brought him up, is the guy that had one of the worst chances of making the team because the Chargers are so deep at receiver. But there was a certain way he lit up about Rocket Sanders, David, that I thought stood out to me when he was talking about him. I mean, a guy that probably fell in the draft because it was such a deep running back draft. I think in most draft years, he probably gets drafted. You probably use a 6th or 7th round flyer on a guy that's had the success that he has in that big time college football programs. And he definitely feels like one of the guys who has a big head start as far as maybe, trying to crack the roster or potentially a practice squad spot.
Yeah, unlike some of those other guys, those other UDFAs that were, participating in all of those special teams drills and all of that, Rocket Sanders was not participating in that, and that was
the only non-drafted player, though, which is I feel like pretty significant. I'm glad you brought that up.
It is, and so that was by design. He said, hey, I know him well. He's got great tape. So that right there are just kind of goes to show you that they already feel really good about him and what he brings to the table. And so, you could say, hey, looking at that running back group, I think, obviously, who the top 2 guys are with Omarion Hampton and, Najee Harris. But after that, I think that's probably a room that could absolutely use some juggling and could use some competition. And there is some opportunity there for somebody to maybe steal one of those back end spots of that running back room. And so clearly, based off of what Jim Harbaugh is saying, Rocket Sanders has a leg up.
And it's easy to see. I mean, he's a guy we watched a little bit of. I mean, a good runner who was kind of let down by the system in the sense that he had his best season as a sophomore where, he put up 1,000-yard season in the SEC at Arkansas. And then his 3rd season, which he had to do because you have to stay at least 3 years, he got hurt. His draft stock plummeted. And then he ended up transferring and going to the ACC at South Carolina the next year, and then still had a very, very good season. But his best year was not the year when he ended up getting drafted, and I definitely think that hurt his stock a little bit. But a dude that definitely has the talent to be on an NFL roster, and a guy we've already kind of marked as saying, hey, this is one of the guys to kind of keep an eye on, because it'll be interesting to watch whose spot he's potentially vying for. Is it Hassan Haskins, or does he just bring too much special teams value as one of their kind of core four guys? Or is it actually 2024 sixth round pick Kamani Vidal, who might be maybe on the roster bubble as things start heating up in training camp? But another guy that David probably should be the least surprising player in the world that Jim Harbaugh would bring up is Stevo Klotz, who is, fullback tight end hybrid from Iowa State, that when you watch him and you see the kind of pancakes that he put on tape, it's very easy to understand why this was a Jim Harbaugh guy. But I mean, we had talked about it when we brought him up the first time, and it's just like, yeah, of course they did their homework on this guy who seems like a little bit of a psycho, and he's going to be the next, like as we talked about on that prior show, fullback that we fall in love with. They were like, hey, this dude is definitely going to make the team.
Well, and it's also clear that the Chargers want to use a fullback. They have, Tucker Fisk that's on the roster, who he's pretty much just a lead blocker. He's a tight end technically in title only, but he's really a fullback. I think we can be honest about that. Scott Matlack, obviously, the 300+ pounder that they kind of converted from a defensive lineman to a fullback, who I think actually got better and better kind of throughout the season as they continued to put him out there. But Stevo Klotz is a real legit fullback, a guy who is moving people out of the way and invites contact, enjoys contact, and wants to be the guy that puts you in the dirt and finishes you past the whistle. And that's why it was very obvious to us that when we're looking down these list of UDFAs, this guy right here definitely makes sense as a Jim Harbaugh type player. And it turns out he absolutely is a Jim Harbaugh type player.
And the NFL is turning the clock back a little bit, especially with someone like a Jim Harbaugh, and fullbacks were sort of an endangered species at a certain point. And that Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh are going to be kind of at the front of the line as far as like keep fullbacks in football, petitions go. But I think when you look at what someone like Greg Roman had in his time in Baltimore, where they had a guy like Patrick Ricard, another kind of former defensive lineman, a guy that could play defensive line at a pinch, a 300-pound fullback that they had out there running routes. They have an infatuation with Scott Matlock that makes it a little unclear kind of how available that more fullback spot could be. Like Tucker Fisk, I don't think that spot's unimpeachable by any means. A guy that was more of a lead blocker, and that's what Stevo Klotz is too. I mean, we keep saying tight end. I think he had less than 10 career catches at Iowa State. That's not what his game is. But I do think it was very interesting that he was kind of asked about it, Jim Harbaugh, that is. And he said, I think that he can be an above average core special teams player in the NFL when he was asked about it. So I thought that was very interesting because that is going to be the way he can make the squad. It has to be on special teams. And I do think he has the skill set to excel in that role. But I think the most surprising name he brought up, because obviously we talked about both of those guys already, was Luke Grimm, the Kansas wide receiver, 5'10", 190 pounds. They said Harbaugh said they really liked his tape. They did their homework on him. He is someone that I think, especially because of the position he plays, David, maybe we rode off a little bit as far as his chances of making the roster. And I'd stand by that as far as making the 53-man roster for sure. But it's clear that he is very much on their radar, and there's something they like about his game that will at least give him a chance at a practice squad spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think, also, I think we have to consider also the fact that the Chargers have an extra preseason game that they're going to have to field a football team for. And, and for Grimm, they were, putting him at returner during practice as well. So, for, those opportunities where you're not going to put Darius Davis on the field, probably, they're going to have somebody that's going to return punts and kicks. It's definitely not going to be Ladd McConkey. So, this is probably one of those guys that he can see, trying to see, try his hand there on special teams to try to make an impact in that way, and maybe be that kind of next guy waiting on the wings on the practice squad if there's anything that does happen with Darius Davis and he has to step in and be that kind of returner for a game or two.
Yeah, you'd have to think that would be I think that's probably discrediting it a little bit just as far as like him, just being kind of a camp body that's going to be used in an extra preseason game to return stuff. Like, you do have to have those players for sure, but you can use any backup fifth string running back to do that if you want to. I think the way they talked about it felt like there was a little bit more than that. I mean, to be one of three guys brought up definitely means, especially saying they like his tape when he wasn't really known for being a returner at Kansas. He's more known for being a receiver, and they had him play outside a lot, but he's probably a slot only guy.
Oh,
Not
yeah,
Bubba
definitely a
Scott,
slot only guy.
But I mean, at his size for sure. I mean, it's still not a tiny, right? He's not Darius Davis size.
No.
But hey, a practice squad, Lab McConkey, somebody to kind of keep around there. You don't have really a ton of slot guys that could play that full time. You have a lot of guys who can moonlight in the slot and then maybe get moved around a little bit. But he does feel like a guy that could be that practice squad player that's maybe potentially fighting for a practice squad spot with the guys like Brendan Rice and Jalen Reagor.
Yeah.
And guys that aren't in kind of that top 6 hierarchy that seems like it separated itself with the 2 rookies, Lab McConkey, Quentin Johnson. Now you have Mike Williams and also Darius Davis because of that return ability, which makes his roster spot seem like it'd be very, very hard to take. But we still have more to get into because there was also some other enlightening comments from Jim Harbaugh, especially about Zion Johnson, who he said it's not if he's going to be starting, it's about where he's going to be starting because he will be starting. We're getting into that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. David, we did get some very good information from Jim Harbaugh, who always lets some nuggets out when he steps up to the podium. He just can't help himself to some degree, even as a guy who's been in the football limelight his entire life to some degree, right? But you always will get something just because of his candor, and it's always kind of like, well, does he know he's doing this? Is it, playing dumb to a certain extent sometimes, I think. But we do have some very, I think, important comments to get into, especially about the interior of this offensive line and how things are playing out and how they will likely play out. But thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen. If you guys need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs, 2 guys that are obviously pros and can keep you up to date with everything going on around the league now that the draft is over. And both of those guys are the best. And you can find them on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from every day. David, let's get into the other Jim Harbaugh comments, specifically about Zion Johnson, which we've talked before just kind of about the infatuation that they have with Bradley Bozeman. I mean, I think you could put Jim Harbaugh into the Zion Johnson fan club as well, because basically he was asked about if Zion Johnson, the center saga, was still happening, and he said, yeah, right now, Bradley Bozeman, starting center, Zion, starting guard. Then next day we flip it, Zion, starting center, Brad Bozeman is starting guard. So it's happening. There's only so much you can get right now. I mean, for someone who hasn't played center, it's probably good to get out there and just snap the ball and, start getting some of those parts of just being a center and those movements, muscle memory kind of stuff down. But that wasn't the most interesting thing to me. The most interesting thing was he was saying, yeah, basically they're moving around. And he said, we'll get our best 5 eventually, as far as who the offensive linemen are, the starting 5. But I know he's going to be one of them. How do you feel about that, David? When you hear that, I mean, I guess it's good to know. I mean, I think it's very significant that he's saying it, but also doesn't, I don't think, give you kind of a super secure feeling inside.
I mean, I don't really like it. I'm going to be 100% honest. And also, the Chargers already kind of showed that they weren't fully sold on Zion Johnson by not picking up his 5th-year option. So I don't know how you can sit here right now and say, he is guaranteed to be one of the top 5 starting offensive linemen on this football team, because what has he done to prove that throughout the first 4 years of his NFL career? I mean, for me, he's been a guy that's shown some flashes of brilliance, shown a nastiness, shown a mean streak, but also shown an ability to not be able to identify stunts and twists and repeatedly kind of have trouble with that consistency. So for me, I don't think anything should be handed to Zion Johnson, regardless if it's center or guard.
Of course. Yeah, and it's hard not to feel like it is being handed to him when you're hearing these specific comments. It was also interesting because he said when it comes to technique, he's at the top. Him, Rashawn, now Joe Alt is at the top of those 2. When it comes to athleticism with Zion, he's probably the most athletic lineman as a run blocker, probably our best, probably our smartest. It was just so funny, like hearing all that, because like obviously you get it. And the thing is like to a certain extent, a lot of those things would be hard to argue with. And the point I agree with is he probably is a top 5 offensive lineman on your team right now. Like he's best suited at guard. He's probably your best left guard option. But that to me is just kind of more of an indictment on the roster building part of it. And Joe Ortiz is getting players he thinks and Jim Harbaugh's telling him that he needs to an extent.
Yeah.
If Jim Harbaugh doesn't feel like they need him, and the way they talk about this interior, it doesn't feel like they think that they need more there. It's hard to really put all the blame on Joe Ortiz. So And the thing is it's the off season is still going and there's still a lot there. But I agree that he's probably a top 5 offensive lineman on the roster, but it just feels like him and Bradley Bozeman are going to have such a head start and securing the left guard and center position, because right now they're basically alternating at those positions with the first team offense. And it doesn't feel great, right? Like it doesn't feel good at all, because I still think the best line is Andre James at center and Zion Johnson at left guard, and there's still a chance that plays out like that. But yeah, I mean, for a guy like Zion Johnson, who is super talented, but when he loses ugly, and he loses fast, and the consistency just isn't there. You want to hear kind of more, I think, realistic, more critical, like, this is a big year. He has a chance to do it. He's got to go do it. Like, and that's not it. If he's the best at this, he's the best at this, he's going to be a starter. That's what ended up coming out. But one note that came out from Daniel Popper is that Ricky Branson Taylor worked exclusively at left guard, which I like, even though it's hard to imagine he can put a real chance into that starting guard position before we see it. We'll see how it goes. But Dave, we also got a big piece of news, and it's Chargers and Chiefs week 1.
Chargers, Chiefs, week 1 in Brazil. That is going to be a banger, like an absolutely marquee matchup with obviously Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. And that's going to be one on the grand stage on the world scale. That's why they want, this type of matchup. We already knew the Chargers were going to be one of those teams that was going to be playing internationally. And so now we know that it's going to be Chargers versus Chiefs to start the NFL season, and man, that is going to be fireworks.
I didn't see it coming from the standpoint of that game. Like, there's so many games on their schedule you can make the argument for. But the thing is like, at first I got pretty worked up about it. Like, just, why that game? Like, go Commanders, go Texans in a rematch of the playoff game. Like, why do a game that could be a different primetime game or whatever? But it makes sense when you dive a little deeper into it. When you peel layers away from the onion and you realize that the NFL is selling that game to YouTube. And what's the best way to sell it? What's the make you make the most money? You sell it to YouTube and you say, okay, well, I'm giving you the team that has Taylor Swift. That comes along with it, right? I'm giving you the team that brings a certain level of ratings. I mean, also the team that's been to 3 straight Super Bowls, right? I don't want to undersell or sell them short. They've been great, as well as also having the sideshow that comes attached to it.
Yeah.
But even though you want to get riled up, according to Pro Football Talk and the reports that are out there, the Chargers had a chance to block this. The Chargers got a chance to block 2 teams on their schedule as far as 2 of the home games that they have, and they didn't pick the Chiefs. So as much as I want to say, okay, well, now you're losing a home divisional game, which count, it's basically 1.5 games on the schedule. You lose one of those 3 right off the bat. You haven't beat the Chiefs since 2021. And now you're either going to have to do it this year in Brazil or in Arrowhead. Neither one of those seems easy, right? But you can't really be that upset, like, as a fan, at least from, the strategic aspect of it, because the Chargers had a chance to make it not the Chiefs, David, and they chose not to do it.
Yeah, I said they opted to focus on teams that visit less frequently, with the Steelers, Commanders, and Eagles specifically named as the games the Chargers were more inclined to protect. So just, that right there also kind of brings an element to me of, like, bring it on. Like, I want all the smoke. I don't care what the circumstances are. Like, we're going to not allow the circumstances to, define our chances in the football game. So I feel like that is kind of a little bit of an element of it to me. But yeah, it does. I do feel for some of the, the season ticket holders that lose a marquee matchup, that they are not going to be able to attend at home. But the Chargers had a chance to protect it, and they chose not to.
Yeah, I think that for the fans, I feel the worst for, right? Like, the season ticket holders, to me, like, it's so obvious. Now that it's 17 games, you're going to have some seasons where there's more home games. You're either going to get 9 home games or 8 home games. On the year you get 8, you should pay less. Doesn't seem that hard. It doesn't seem that hard. If you're going to tell the fans and you're not guaranteeing them a seat in a stadium in Brazil, you should get reimbursed 1/9 of whatever your season tickets cost. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, asking your fans who pay for these, premium seat licenses, who pay for these season tickets and pay thousands of dollars for them, and just be, okay, sorry, you're SOL on the first game of the season in a huge matchup against your division rival. And you have one chance to see someone like Patrick Mahomes on your season ticket schedule and to see Justin Herbert go up against him. And now that's in Brazil. Not super easy to just pack it up and be like, okay, well, we're taking a 5-day trip to Brazil now to go see this game. And even then, I don't believe that you get like a for sure seat. I don't think that's really how it works. So I do feel bad for the season ticket holders. But it is a big stage. I mean, it's going to be streamed live on YouTube, not on YouTube TV. You don't have to have a membership for it. It's just going to be available to the 2 billion people that have access to YouTube. A chance to break a ton of records. It's a Friday night game, so it's going to be a standalone game where you have all the eyes on you as the second game of the NFL season. It's going to be huge, and it will be a great measuring stick. It's a great chance to come out and make a statement. I mean, if you go out there and handle the Kansas City Chiefs, who've been to 3 straight Super Bowls week 1 in Brazil on a neutral site, right, battling all the things that come along with kind of a travel like that, you couldn't really make much of a bigger statement. Like, unless you literally beat the Eagles, who you will have to play at home at some point this season, that's the biggest statement you can make. So the risk of it, is that you come out, you fall flat, you feel further away than you were before, and you don't get it done. But I do think to have a chance, for Justin Herbert to take out Patrick Mahomes for the first time in a long time, for the Chargers to say, we didn't beat good teams last year when we played them, we're going to kick the season off by beating one of the best teams with the best quarterback. Yeah, that's a huge statement, right? And the Chargers don't seem to be afraid of the smoke because they had a chance to avoid that in prime time, and they chose not to. So it'll be a lot of fun. The Chargers obviously have a lot of moving pieces. Like the way that they had to kind of build this roster over the last couple of seasons meant that there was quite a bit of turnover. But you're returning most of your starters on the defensive side for the most part. Your quarterback's in play. Your wide receiver one's in play. You have a lot of the same guys offensively, but you've kind of added to it and supplemented that side of the ball, and now have some, explosive rookies coming to the mix. We'll see. But, man, it could be fireworks in the first week of the season for the Chargers, and I'm really excited to see how it all plays out. But not always ideal to lose a divisional home game when you're going to do an international game like this. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. The good news is you have a chance to tell us what you want to talk about tomorrow, because it's Buy or Sell Tuesday, getting into the biggest Charger storylines and overreactions, and we'll also get into whatever Chargers news comes out tomorrow, if there is any. But make sure to hit us up at Locked On OIC to give us your buy or sell. Instagram at Locked On Chargers, or Locked On Chargers Facebook page, or we'll put a post out on YouTube as well. But to make sure you don't miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. And you can also call into the voicemail line if you want at 323-524-7924 and get your 30-second Chargers buy or sell in. But David, great to hear a little bit about the rookies. It's only going to start ramping up from here until we get these other OTAs and mandatory minicamp and all of that stuff. And make sure you're with the only daily Chargers podcast to keep you up to date with it. But until tomorrow, guys, when we get to Buy or Sell Tuesday, take it easy and go Bolts.